Hi, pal. Welcome to I've Got Your Back, the podcast. My name is Michelle Sutherland, and this is a place where I want to empower and inspire you to tap into the deepest desires of your heart and discover the magic within. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on I've Got Your Back, the podcast. I am so excited to be bringing you another guest today. And this woman I met in South Africa back in December of 2024. And I was there doing a leadership immersion with my friend Tom. And Tom and I had sort of facilitated this event for a leadership team. And when Tom and I were chatting, like he immediately said to me, we have to get to Billy. We have to get to Billy. We have to get to Billy. And I was like, oh, okay. And of course, I didn't know who Billy was. And that's who we've got on the podcast. And immediately when Billy came in and started to just speak, like I'm even getting goosebumps now in my legs. I actually got like goosebumps about how courageous she was and how brave she was. And in the room that we were particularly in and saying the things she was saying. And I know she'll get that. But I just was so in awe of her being brave and showing up and saying things that really needed to be said in that room on that day. And off the back of that, I just had to reach out to her and get her on here because I know that many of you, we've got people in Australia, we've got people in the UK, like would never have heard of Tabili. And I believe it's really important that her voice is heard, that we hear her wisdom because she's got so much wisdom to share. And we just have a conversation and we see where we go. So, welcome Tabili. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Yeah, it was such an experience meeting you in South Africa, and even that engagement just felt so different for me. Just the way that you and Tom work, it's really special and really aligns with my values. So really, so grateful that we crossed paths. I am well. I am in between meetings and
I
on leave next week, but I love these moments where you can kind of just sit down and be present. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to just, yeah, breathe and allow this moment for a connection.
Oh, thank you, Tabili. And I just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction again, because not many people will know who you are on here. And there's lots of things I could say. So I just want to touch on a few things. You're a passionate community builder, BMW Foundation Responsible Leader. You're a TEDx speaker dedicated to reimagining economies and communities where justice, creativity, and sustainability thrive. You are the network co-lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and advocating for a world where economies serve people and the planet. And your work focuses on demystifying economic concepts to empower active citizenship, which I really want to talk about that as well, and build a more inclusive future. So there's so much more to you than just that little introduction, but just to give people like just context of where you're coming from and what you're doing in the world and your work. But I would just love for you to share in your own words, like more about you, like your story. I know you shared a little bit of your story when we met, but I would love for you just to share a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. So yeah, as mentioned, there's a lot of the work that you've mentioned that I've been part of, and I think that's great, but a lot of my history and my background kind of shaped why I've gone into those fields today. But yeah, just for those who don't know, I'm based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I was originally actually born in KZN. KZN is a coastal town in South Africa. It's called KwaZulu-Natal, and my family are Zulu from the Zulu tribe. And I was born in 1989, which reveals my age, but at that point, it was just before the end of apartheid. Obviously, our new democracy really came into being in 1994. So 1989 was really just the peak of knowing, or the national government, the apartheid government at that time, knowing that things were about to change, and they instigated a lot of violence, and especially black on black violence, specifically amongst the political parties that were, yeah, popular, I guess, amongst Black people, which was the IFP and the ANC. And obviously, the ANC eventually became our ruling party. But at that time, it was really, there was a lot of conflict between the two. And the IFP are the Zulus predominantly, and the ANC are the Xhosas, which is another tribe in South Africa, predominantly in the Eastern Cape. And yeah, there was conflict, major conflict between the two. And my father was IFP, but in ANC territory. And essentially, his family homestead was burnt down. I was 8 months old at the time. And he fled to the place where he used to be a window washer, which was at a gym in the suburbs. And of course, at that time, everything was really, the land was racially segregated. So he had to flee from those rural homestead and try find a place to stay. And the first thing he thought of was his place of employment. And that was really what changed my life, was connecting with this family that took us in, which was illegal at the time, and gave us a home. And I think it's a long story, of course, but just their act of bravery, their act of recognizing the injustice that had taken place, and really not just a short-term thing, just giving us a place to stay, but to this day, they are still part of my family, recognizing that, yeah, reparations and all of that kind of thing is a long-term commitment. It's not just like I can hand out some money and help your family and then carry on with my life. No, they really like took interest and really dedicated themselves to the betterment of my family. And yeah, there were obviously ups and downs with that, but for the most part, it really gave me a sense of justice, but also a sense of like appreciation and gratitude of what one person can do or what one family can do for the next. And I think I've always been driven by that. Like, I recognize how my life has completely changed because of that. And who knows what could have happened to us at that time. Um, and yeah, I think also being immersed in different cultures then, because they were a white family, I was obviously part of a Black family, and that being really in between, the daughter of that family that took us in became a little bit like my godmother or another mother to me. And I have now other mothers, but she really was a huge part of, and still is a huge part of my life. And so having two different mothers from different racial backgrounds and experiences, I think gave me also perspective in terms of recognizing how different people live and the injustices because of race and stereotypes, and also wanting to go beyond maybe some of the stereotypes and assumptions of the labels that people give in society. So I think it's this mixed pot that I lived in and grew up in, that gave me this sense of wanting to kind of be, I guess, like a bridge builder and connect the dots and connect people, but always just knew in the depths of my heart that I would always be involved in social justice to some extent. Didn't know how, but I think, yeah, that's a bit about who I am. The other part, just to mention, is Kim, who is my other mother. She was a dance teacher at this gym. So that's another side of me that I have to mention, is that I am very passionate about the arts and creativity and culture. And I think especially in South Africa, we recognize that talking is important, but we have other forms of communication through storytelling, through dance, through music, through humor. And these are ways or channels, I guess, for reconciliation and empathy and all of these things that we need in the world. And I still appreciate that I got to be immersed in that kind of creative side of things when I grew up. And yeah, dance is something that I really hope to use more of in the future, to bring people together and to help people see one another a little bit more.
Oh, I love that, Thobile. And you're speaking to the converted because I'm a dancer and I danced,
Ah,
yeah, from 3 years old till I
oh
was
wow.
23, then I could teach it. And you just reminded me of a story. Like you just took me right back, just at the end there of your story. There was so much in that. So thank you for sharing so openly. But just at the end there, you took me back to this moment in Nepal where a group of women and I went to this remote village, like 5 hours outside of Kathmandu. And we went to the local like community center where all the women like meet
Mhm.
just to connect. Like each night, and they couldn't speak a word of English. Obviously, we couldn't speak Nepalese. And what happened was we ended up connecting through dance. So we
Oh,
danced, so they showed us their traditional dance, and then we copied them. And then like, I was the only Scottish one, so I did a little bit of Highland dancing, and they were like, and so
amazing.
we actually connected through dance. Like, not one of us could verbally speak, but
Mm,
those women, they were just like, we were so grateful, they were so grateful, and there was just this powerful connection that
mm,
connected us in such a deep level. And you just took me right back and thinking about like how other things apart from talking can actually connect people so quickly and so deeply. It's amazing. And
so
I do
true.
feel like, and I'm assuming you feel this as well, like, I think the creatives and the artists and the dancers, they have a real part to play, like even more so, I think now in social entrepreneurship and
Definitely.
justice and breaking down barriers. Like I really feel that they're going to break down so much and they're going to unite actually so much as well.
Oh, completely agree. So amazing that, yeah, that you had that story. And yeah, I'm so moved because I think I've missed that part of activism.
Mm.
And I think we often see that there is a disconnect, from people just understanding what do you mean by climate change? What do you mean by these terms? Even if, my work is much more heady, like economic systems change. These words are sometimes so far removed from the everyday realities of people. And I think dance, art, culture connects at such, yeah, like you're saying, much quicker and at a deeper level. And I really am just wanting to press into that more. And like you're saying, with the world being so polarized at the moment, it feels like words are not helping to a certain extent.
Word
And
against word. I'll say a word,
hey,
you'll say it, and then it's like we'll just keep going back with words and words and words. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then another thing I want to touch on, because you mentioned this when we were in South Africa together, and you were talking about, obviously, you're really passionate about social justice and completely understand the connection from your childhood into why you're doing that. And one of the things you spoke about was like social entrepreneurship. So I'm a social entrepreneur. I believe like any project I do, any collaboration, it has to benefit people, communities, and the planet. Like whatever it is, that's my
Mm,
sort of like go to. And I use the power of entrepreneurship to solve problems. Like I see problems in the world, I'm like, I'm going to implement this solution to help with that problem. But I'm just curious to know, you mentioned social entrepreneurship in Africa and South Africa, and you mentioned that you're starting to see more and more people actually take on social enterprises or start social enterprises. I'm just curious, can you share a bit more about what's happening in Africa? Like I sit on the board for Social Enterprise Scotland, so I see amazing things going on in Scotland, but I'm just curious. In Scotland is seemingly very advanced in the social
yeah.
enterprise world, which is so good. I didn't know this till recently. But I'm just curious, like what's happening in Africa, what's happening in South Africa in relation to social entrepreneurship or social enterprise.
Yeah, it is an exciting time, I think, for social entrepreneurship. When I came into this space, I think at that point didn't really have the language around it too much. So before coming into this space, obviously just knowing I wanted to do something creative, I went into marketing and advertising. I did that for 10 years. But even in that space, I was always saying to my boss, who's still a part of my life, Jason, like, can't these brands do more because they have so much power and influence and appeal to people? They could use that, like, in such a positive and meaningful way. And so not being able to articulate what social entrepreneurship was at that time, just did a lot of like purpose marketing or social marketing and using these campaigns, I guess, to make a meaningful difference in the lives of South Africans. Um, but then it got to a point where I felt there was a lack of integrity sometimes with the brands we worked with because it was so peripheral, if that makes sense. Like it was just something that they did as a marketing campaign, but didn't always reflect, not all the time, but sometimes didn't reflect who the brand was and how they thought about their business and the purpose and mission of their business. And that then got me thinking, like, how can that change? And at that time was really trying to explore that. And social entrepreneurship, it was just divine intervention because a lot was starting to happen in that space of social entrepreneurship. This was probably around 2016, 17. And it was just great. So I left the advertising space and went into this space and went to study at a business school, social entrepreneurship, to really try understand it. And at that time, I realized actually we don't have a registration in South Africa as being a social enterprise. You could be a non-profit or a for-profit. And what often happens in South Africa is just a hybrid model that you end up becoming a little bit of both. The for-profit provides their surplus to the non-profit to kind of be sustainable. And so that's still today the nature of the way that we register social entrepreneurs or enterprises in South Africa, although there is a lot of movement, incredible figures in South Africa that have been writing. I think it's a white paper or green paper, I can't remember which was first, but it will become policy at some point. And there's definitely recognition from our president. He's really been uplifting this term of a social and solidarity economy, and social entrepreneurship really forms a lot of that anyway. So it seemed like there's momentum. But what I got into was very much a grassroots community called Makers Valley. It's on the eastern outskirts of Johannesburg CBD. And it's a special community. It's really quite diverse. When I was mentioning apartheid really kind of segregated people by race. So you still have in Johannesburg and everywhere in South Africa, white people live here, black people live here, colored people live here. But some reason, because of just the income of African populations into Johannesburg and the mining people in this specific area, this has become quite a diverse space in terms of race, but really tough in terms of income. And what was interesting at that time, there was an incredible guy doing his doctorate on spatial justice and this term, a well-being economy. But during those meetings in this community saying, how can we transform this community? It really came up that there were a plethora of different challenges, from social issues to environmental issues. There are so many, from unemployment to river, like just pollution to, yeah, food insecurity, everything. You can pick a box, you can find it in this community. But that wasn't the image that we wanted. We wanted to be known as people that can make a difference because we have ideas, we have lived experience, and we really wanted to change the narrative around community development, not this top-down kind of like savior thing. And social entrepreneurship became the tool to really change the narrative to say, actually, we have ability, we have understanding that no other person can have, and we are entrepreneurial. If you come to Johannesburg, you'll feel the energy. It's like
Mm,
we know how to make a plan and do things from nothing.
yeah.
And that energy was definitely present. And so the community started to come up with ideas, and that was really the opportunity to say, like, how do we take these ideas into a social enterprise? And I think what's special about social entrepreneurship in South Africa is we are inundated with issues, but actually we know how to solve them if we allow people the space to do so. And I think I don't like the word empowering. It really is enabling. Instead of us saying we're going to wait for government to hand out things, actually, what can we do on the ground to change things? And also, how can this be beneficial, profit-wise for me, so I can sustain my family, but at the same time, I am contributing to my community. And what we started to find is actually so many incredible change makers came to the surface and started. And to this day, there's an incubation hub. There is so many social entrepreneurships from recycling. Love Our City Clean does community cleanups. There's a community currency formed with the People's Pantry and Love Our City Clean. There's urban farming. There's a plethora of them. But what has been so special for me about it is that it has encouraged this community to see a different picture of themselves. And even the name Makers Valley was a name that they chose for themselves. Makers being change makers, but also using our hands, heads, heart, feet, whatever we have around us to build something. And what's happened now is that the youth, especially in a community where it is so tough, you often find in lots of communities, people, the young people leave, the talented people leave, and they go into greener pastures. But what started to happen here is actually people started to stay. They saw that there was a like this energy bubbling up, and they started to say, actually, I want to get involved in this. But also, if I've started my own social enterprise, I want to be here. I'm more invested in this community. And I think that you mentioned like active citizenship. I
Mm.
think social entrepreneurship really is a tool for that because there's a sense of ownership. You're not just going to an NGO and volunteering. No, you've come up with an idea that you know can solve an issue in this community. There's a sense of like, I'm part of this through and through. And that really then activates the spirit of, I want to be involved in this community. Instead of just walking to the NGO, as you're walking to your social enterprise, wherever it might be, you're seeing the community in a different way. You're like, actually, let me pick up the litter now because I want my social enterprise to also benefit from a cleaner community. And so there really is like this ripple effect through social entrepreneurship in South Africa. And obviously, I'm speaking very much at a grassroots level, but definitely, I've also been involved in many other social enterprise. Academy is also in South Africa, and they're doing a lot of work here to really mobilize the social entrepreneurship space. And many more universities are offering this now as a course. So yeah, it's exciting times, I think. I think it is helpful that it's not yet registerable,
Yeah.
that you can actually just explore what this means. And I think it's given us a lot of time. I think it's been more than 10 years now for South Africans to test what does social entrepreneurship mean to us? What are the learnings? How can we be more ethical? I think there is a risk of people using the term I'm a social enterprise and not having accountability yet because there is no actual legal framing for it. But that will come, and we've had the most amazing chance to use it and test it out and pilot it. And I think people are attracted to it. Why just be an entrepreneur when you could be a social entrepreneur?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's exciting times in
Yeah.
South Africa for social enterprise.
I love that. I want to come to Makers Valley. I want to come and see.
Yeah, you must next time.
Yeah, next time I want to come there. But yeah, it's so cool because it's like without having the legal structure, like you're saying, it's very grassroots and it's almost like experimental, which entrepreneurship should
Mm,
be, like especially social entrepreneurship.
exactly.
And I love that you use the word enabling rather than empowering. I use the word empowering a lot, but enabling it totally makes sense why you're using that word instead of empowering because you're literally enabling someone else. It's not about me empowering you. It's actually about
Mm,
enabling someone to empower themselves in a lot of ways. I really love that. And I'm curious because you mentioned this as well when we spoke, because obviously there's no legal entity or structure for social enterprise yet in South Africa. And obviously, like for those that don't know, a social enterprise is is essentially a for-profit business that really has a big social or environmental impact. So it's not a charity, it's not a full for-profit business. It's almost like gathering the goodness of both and bringing it together. And so obviously it does exist to make money. And one of the things that you shared when I met you, and I didn't know this, you put a slide up and it basically said, the man that came up with GDP and measuring that and is basically saying that it's no longer valid. Like we need something else because we need to measure beyond GDP, like because it doesn't actually measure everything. And if you look at even just thinking of where you were talking about in the valley, like Makers Valley, like, you know, I'm just curious. Like when you said that to me, I was like, wow, like what else do we measure? Obviously, we know Bhutan measures happiness, but I started to go inwards and think about obviously Scotland and thinking, like, what is Scotland's purpose and what do we measure beyond GDP? Like, what do we want to do as a country? And you definitely
Mm,
inspired that thought process, and it's still with me today, which is like 3, 4 months on. I'm still sitting with those questions. And I'm like, I feel as if as a country, and in every country, but specifically just speaking from my own, like we have to do this. We have to think of something beyond GDP and what is it and what do we do?
mm.
Have you got any other thoughts on that or examples of other countries and what they're doing? I would love to know.
Yeah. So yeah, that ties into the work that I'm really involved in now. And I think, yeah, that whole thing around GDP, for people that are, my passion is demystifying the economy. I'm not an economist, but getting ordinary people to be part of the economy is the first step. Because if you go back to the original meaning of economy, is oikos, it really just means the management of our home. And everyone should be part of that. And how we manage that, we want people and planet to thrive, which is why social entrepreneurship, it's always comes up in these discussions. But of course, we also need to measure what matters. And GDP or production is not actually what matters to people at all or to the planet. And my very simple example is if there was a tree and you had to cut it down, you could use the wood to create a table, and GDP would technically increase because there's production. But the repercussions are not measured. The fact that that tree no longer exists has huge implications because one, there's no more shade. Two, the insects and the birds and the ecosystem that lived around that tree can no longer, the carbon emissions that it pulled from the air, it's no longer doing that. And so this is really where you see the gap, that GDP doesn't measure what actually matters to people because those things are so important. The fact that it's reducing carbon emissions in the air is vital. And so, as you can see, there are so many other things that we could measure. And what's incredible is that there is starting to be a movement around what we call beyond GDP and even post-growth thinking, because it's about what are we trying to achieve? And like you're saying, at the end of the day, what is in Scotland trying to achieve at the end of the day? In South Africa, we can ask the same question. And I think it's such an important question to ask ourselves at an individual level, at a household level, community level, city, country. But some countries are asking this question. So Wales, for example, has asked the question, what is the Wales you want to leave behind for your children? In some contexts, they ask, what does a good life really mean to you? And of course, it's not a one size fits all, because what might matter to you in Scotland might be very different to us in South Africa. And this is why there are different indicators across the world. I know the OECD has mentioned them. The UN have also now spoken about GDP plus three, measuring three other things besides just GDP. Many countries, Canada also has a quality of life framework. Brazil is now speaking about an impact economy and what are the things they want to measure. So there are a lot of countries that are having these conversations. Some already, I think, Finland, Iceland, Scotland, even Wales, Canada, and New Zealand are six countries that already have been thinking about this and started to look at indicators and frameworks for their countries. And they are part of a grouping, what we call the Wellbeing Economy Governments. And they have been very intentional about it. What the issue is, though, sometimes is that these things are long term. And sometimes politically, depending on who's in charge, and we know in the last couple of years, there's been so much political change and prime ministers stepping down, and you name it. I think the same thing in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon was a huge advocate of this way of thinking. But of course, it needs to have longevity, longer than your 4-year term or whatever it might be. And so this is something that we're really thinking about as an organization, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. How do we have indicators and frameworks that last, one, and two, can we create coherency? Because as you're saying, there are many countries that all have their own different indicators, Bhutan and many others. But what happens is GDP becomes the go-to because all the countries use it. And so it's easier to just use that as a global measure. And so this is why there's lots of conversation of bringing people together, especially people that are working in the space, policymakers, etc., to kind of create some coherency around what is it that we want to measure. It might have nuances at local regions, but also there are definitely broader things that we can measure. And at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we speak about real needs. Of course, there's different things that come up in different communities. But when we ask, what is a good life really to you? Things that come up often is dignity, making sure that we have dignity and we have a safe enough place to live and that there's happiness, fairness and justice in the world, that nature is at the heart of what we do, that we're regenerative, to ensure that, for example, there is purpose in terms of the economy. What are we trying to achieve? Are we working towards the common good? Is there a sense of belonging? Yeah, so these things come up as what we find often, no matter where in the world, people will come up with those things over and over again as something that they really feel is important. Participation is the other one. Sorry, there's five. That people don't want to just sit back, they want to be active citizens and part of the decision-making process. And so we're saying, hey, if those are the five things that come up over and over again, how do you then make those indicators or outcomes? And how do we have an economy that serves those things? Because right now it feels like we are serving this economy that is completely just burning people out. The planet is literally burning, and it's extractive and it's exploitative. And so we're really wanting to say, actually, this feels upside down. What are we living for if this economy is sucking the life out of us and our planet? Surely we should redesign it to ensure that these things that we say we need to thrive and to flourish is the way that the economy should be designed. So it's about designing these indicators and metrics to measure it. But I think there's also a level of embodiment and how. Because what we find sometimes as well with indicators and metrics is you can tick that box. In South Africa, for example, they would say, for example, we have one of the highest percentages of our GDP dedicated to education. But if you've come to South Africa and you come into our schools, there's a huge mismatch.
Yeah.
And so there's something, yeah, missing in the process and the approach. So it's not just always about ticking that box of metrics, although that is one of the first steps, is like, what is the metric? What are we measuring? It doesn't matter. But what matters even more is how then do we get to live that out? How do we embody that? And our approach and our principles to achieve those outcomes is just as important.
Yeah. And you mentioned before an economy in the service of life. And I love
Yes.
that. And I think
Mm.
exactly what you've just described. It's like, economy being a home. Like, how do we be in service to life and every day within that home? and that I think that is a really powerful message and a powerful like statement because I think a lot of the world has forgotten that. Like this is our
Yeah.
home, and how do we be in service to one another and live in harmony and peace and all of those things. But you're right, it does have to start, I think, especially with the world we live in today, there has to be some measurement because we can't, I think, going from GDP to like nothing, we have to
Pause.
like get, like you also said, bringing all people to the party, all people involved to sort of come up with the next evolution of what it's going to be. But then I think it goes back to what you shared before. It's like knowing that we could have sort of other measurements around GDP, but then how do we filter that through or allow it to rise from the grassroots and all come together? Like it feels
Mm.
like sometimes I feel, because I don't come from a political background, I'm not really into policies. Like I don't know, I'm like a social entrepreneur in a small town outside of Glasgow. And again, a lot of the things you've said, like language, when people talk in this language, I'm
Mm.
like, what are you talking about? Like I don't understand. And equally, like my pals next door wouldn't understand. So it's like,
Exactly.
how do we take these things that we're working on in lots of different rooms in the world with policymakers and change makers, but how do we actually have a real conversation at the grassroots level to embed that? That's
Mm.
what I feel is sort of like, yeah, and we don't need to answer that right now, but that's what, when you were talking, I was
We
like,
do, yeah. I mean, I think we attempting that at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. I
yeah,
think that really is our goal, is to convene different levels and different players. And I think everyone brings perspective, right? Everyone has wisdom to share. And that's the important thing, is bringing a policymaker with a regenerative agriculturist, and
yes,
them in the same room, because that's what whole systems thinking is about, is that you can't just have a certain demographic of people making decisions because they just lack the perspective. And so, yeah, it really is important to do that. And what's great about our alliance is that although we're global, we recognize that we need to engage, even when you're speaking about language, in the language of people. So we have hubs in different parts of the world, and they are place-based. They understand the culture, the language, the politics, of that place and space. And what's great is that they are really embodying what a well-being economy is in their context and their land. And we're not precious about the word well-being economy. We just wanting to use a word that resonates with people. So for in South Africa, it's called the African Liberation Hub, recognizing that we have experienced colonization and had Western systems imposed on us. Actually, this is the time where we are liberating ourselves and thinking about what are the economic systems we want that embody our culture and our indigenous wisdom. And the same is happening across the world. In Brazil, we have Alta Economia and many other places. And this is what's great, is that, yes, we need to have the local expressions of what this means, the well-being of people and planet. What does that mean for you in your context? But then also connecting these localities globally, because we can learn so much from one another. We've learned so much from Scotland in terms of social entrepreneurship, and vice versa. I think the Scotland, the Social Enterprise Academy is always like, oh my word, is this what's happening in South Africa? Is this the way that you're doing things? And so that shared knowledge at a global level is also so vital. And I think the combination of the two, local and global, connections, are the way to do it.
yeah,
But of course, I think a big thing with the extractive system that is capitalism in its most aggressive form is very concerned with time and efficiency, and we need to slow down. And this is what I think is a big thing, is actually, if we can't have meaningful conversations, policymakers are always going to just tick boxes and showcase, oh, we've done the job, because they're in the system that is telling them, time is money. But if we really have an abundant, mindset, recognizing that Bio, one of the most incredible thinkers, always speaks about the times are urgent, therefore slow down. It's a Nigerian proverb, and it really resonates with me because I think once we slow down and have these eye-to-eye conversations, and in South Africa, we say sawubona, which is I see you. Once we can do that and really see one another, we can then understand the systems that we want to embody going forward. So, yeah, co-creation is a huge part of this, but co-creation doesn't happen overnight. It takes back and forth. It takes picking each other's brains. It takes critical discussion and testing and experimenting to come to these economies we want to see, these economies that are in service of life. So I think it is about really taking the time to convene and to see one another and see what does this look like going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I've loved it, Thobile. I could chat to you like all night, but I know you've got other things to do. But I just wanted to end by asking you a question, and I always ask this at the end. And the question is, what do you believe the world needs to know right now?
That is a beautiful one. Yeah, I feel the world needs to have grace for one another. I think when we look at it, we are all trying our best. And I think one of the things that I've recognized in my work is actually looking at not just the words and when you think you're delivering something, an economy and service of life, you're like, surely people should get that. And I think that does resonate at the bigger level. But then when you say, okay, we need to redistribute land, or then it becomes like that scarcity mindset comes back. And then you want to understand, where does the scarcity come in? And it actually comes from a place of wanting to protect maybe my family, wanting to look after and think about the future of my kids. And so some of the negative things that we are seeing in the world, it can provoke us and trigger us. But I hope that we can see beyond that and really get to the root of why are people reacting in this way? Why are people doing that? And even look at ourselves and really go to the heart of our intentions. And when we do that, I think it helps us have grace for one another. It helps us really, I guess, love for one another. Yesterday, people were speaking about a love economy, and I know it sounds so fluffy and warm, but ultimately, that is what keeps humanity together. We speak about Ubuntu. It is so important for us to see the humanity in one another, and that really is important. That there is no you without me, Michelle, and vice versa. And what is happening in the world is people are becoming so individualistic, so separated and disconnected. But ultimately, we are at a deeper level and spiritual level connected. And I think if we remember that we are deeply connected, that what happens, another South African expression is an injury to one is an injury to all. When we remember that, I think it can help us see one another in a better way, and it can help us then come together and strengthen relations and trust one another so that we can co-create solutions. But it really does start with humanity. So yeah, I think grace and love is what I'll say, those two words.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Thobile. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thank you for the conversation and yeah, just making me think a little bit more deeply. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. Remember, download the Yoga Nidra right after this episode. Make sure you have a listen. It's the most beautiful guided meditation that will regenerate your mind, your body, and your soul. Take care. See you soon.